I'm not gonna lie, this one gets a little, heady. Sorry. At the end of my senior year of high school, after the AP exams had been taken and the remaining few weeks of class were required but meaningless, my English teacher asked everyone to give speeches about what we believed truth to be. Now, I've always seen truth in two parts: objective and subjective. Subjective truth is a more pretentious way to say opinion, while objective truth relates to facts, regardless of how people feel about them. One of the kids in my class, who I will call Jasmine because everyone else did, came into school on the day of the speeches dressed as a fairy, which was an interesting choice. And I pointed at her during my speech and said, "It is an objective truth that Jasmine is wearing a fairy costume." And I could feel the tension in the room because folks knew that the thought wasn't over and assumed that I was about to say something mean. I wasn't, but I get why they assumed that. The next person, we'll call her Chelsea, erased the O in my scrawl and replaced it with SU. Her handwriting being much better than mine, I found this terribly unpleasant to look at, but that was just my subjective truth. Though to her, all truth was subjective. Now, this was about a decade ago, so I'm a little fuzzy on the specifics, but basically the idea was that everyone is on a sailboat going off into an endless ocean, and each boat will only ever have access to a small sliver of that ocean, this tiny bit of experience to draw upon, and that what a person calls truth is the result of their experiences, and so it must be subjective. And no two people's truths can ever be the same because no two people have had the same experience. I don't think this is a great metaphor for truth. Red is light with a wavelength of 680 nanometers, no matter where someone is in the ocean, but it is useful for understanding differences of opinion, like why two different people may have wildly disparate reactions to the color. But even more than that, it's a great way to think about free will, because I fervently reject the idea that people have truly free will. At any given moment, what someone is able to do is dictated by their current circumstances and not some righteous liberation of the self or whatever. And that's even more true right now, where something like uprooting my life to move to Seoul has become a literal impossibility instead of just the usual conceptual one. That isn't to say I am resigned to determinism, the belief that everything happens due to external factors, and when we believe we're making a choice, we're actually responding in an entirely predictable way to these factors, and someone with a sufficiently powerful computer could correctly map out my entire life, and perhaps everyone else's. Frankly, I just don't like that. I prefer the boat pushed along by the winds and the waves. Most of the time, we just let it go the way that it's going. But it remains possible to do something in or with the boat that this hypothetical computer wouldn't, if not necessarily couldn't, predict. Hello, by the way, and welcome to the Week Air Review. You can call me not a scientist. And today, I'm talking about Devs, Alex Garland's limited series that just wrapped up over on Hulu. If you've seen any of the show's 8 episodes, you'll know why I was talking about at least some of that before. And if you haven't, well, you probably didn't make it this far and are already writing a nasty comment telling me to stop talking about myself and just get to the point. But the thing is, all of that is the point, including how long it took me to get to the point. This is a series that probes some fundamental questions about the universe, and particularly how they relate to humanity and, of course, free will. And it takes its sweet time getting there. Garland has already proven to be one of the most interesting filmmakers working today. Well, he had been writing scripts for others on and off since 2002, with his first being for Danny Boyle's Zombie Apocalypse 28 Days Later, and continuing through the brilliant and criminally underseen Dread 2012. He stepped up behind the camera in 2014 with one hell of a debut, Ex Machina, which questions humanity and wonders whether it even requires actual humans. Next was Annihilation, the best film of 2018, and one I saw in theaters 4 separate times. So its failure at the box office is distinctly not my fault. Which looks at humanity again, though through the lens of trauma and how it shapes people and their actions. And you can see shades of both in Devs. Like Ex Machina, this series focuses on a coder who works for the world's tech giant and comes face to face with its heavily bearded founder for one reason or another. Then Blue Book under Oscar Isaac's Nathan Bateman, now Amaya under Nick Offerman's Forrest. Like Annihilation, it uses trauma as its catalyst. Forrest named Amaya after his daughter, who is dead. The entire Devs project that gives the show his name is ultimately about bringing her back in some form. Then, series protagonist Lily comes into the picture because her boyfriend Sergei dies under suspicious circumstances, and she needs to understand what happened and why. These questions about determinism that drove this project play into its predecessor. Each film is deeply interested in cause and effect, with Ex Machina being about humans who believe that they have control over a situation but learn all too late that they do not, and Annihilation being about what happens after people come to terms with the loss of control and what it drives them to do. None of these broken people really choose to go on that suicide mission into the mysterious shimmer. They are pulled to it and then drawn ever closer to the lighthouse from which it all began, until they're not, on a path that seems fixed until it doesn't. Amaya is a tech giant focused on quantum computing, a real thing that exists that is a fundamental rethinking of how to do computation, using as its base of information a qubit rather than a bit. But where actual machines from the likes of Google and IBM can only use a few dozen qubits and do so with a relatively high error rate, the one at Devs works with a number so high it seems pointless to express as a number, according to Forrest. All of the show's sci-fi elements take place within the Devs facility, which is really more like a compound, and its look reflects that. The big box suspended by magnets in a perfect vacuum to ensure that nothing can get in or out unwittingly. They are using that computer, in essence, to prove determinism. Dev's work is predicated on the idea that if you have enough data about a thing, then you not only know its current state, but you can see how it got there, and also where it will go next, and on forever. Critically, you don't need perfect information about everything to scale this. If you have a dead rat on a table and understand it at the most fundamental level, then you can move outwards, because each thing is having a determinable effect on what exists next to it. And so you extrapolate out and out until you have the entire universe and all of time contained within it at your fingertips. But when we first see it, there is a limitation. The further away one gets from the now, the less clear it all gets. The more variances appear that the computer, as powerful as it is, cannot properly account for. Forrest can watch his daughter playing in her room with comparative clarity, but we get mostly outlines of Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller together in bed, and little more than shadows for Jesus on the cross. But it turns out that this isn't a failure of computing, but of theory. Because when boy genius Lyndon moves from the de Broglie bomb theory to the Everett interpretation, those variances disappear, and everything snaps into perfect focus. Now let's be honest. If you try to think this through, you're going to get confused. You're probably already confused, and I'm sorry about that. But you don't have to be, because most of the confusing stuff doesn't really matter. One issue that science fiction always has is trying to figure out what to explain to the audience and then how to do it. On the one side, you've got Interstellar, wherein actual astronauts need to have high school physics explained to them. On the other, you've got Primer, which basically requires a physics degree to really understand its explanation. Devs largely ignores the science. If you don't know what a qubit is, the series isn't going to tell you. But it will have someone explain why moving from de Broglie bomb to the Everett interpretation does not break the machine's basis in determinism. So I tried not to get hung up on things. But I do want to take a moment to talk about the actual projection system that Devs uses to see through space and time. There is a little theater in the Devs facility with a fancy touchscreen that lets the people go to when and wherever. When Lily finally makes it to devs and sees this, her instinct is that she's just watching a movie. And that was something that kind of bothered me about it. You see, this quantum system is not just presenting the world. It's doing so with the same beautiful, sweeping camera movements of the series itself, with full editing and possibly even a score. And I get why these weren't all done in one take with a fixed or even roaming camera, but that would have made it feel like we were looking in on a different time in a way that it just doesn't. And once they've moved over to Everett and cleaned up the image, it's impossible for us as the audience to know if we are being shown a projection or the real world until we see if it breaks apart at the end. I get that Debs wants to be opaque at times, but it's frustrating in cases like that where it feels just for the sake of it. I mean, think about Sonoya Mizuno's performance as Lily. It is one of the strangest things I have ever seen in a television series, because it's easy to read as just bad, but it was also immediately clear to me that it was an intentional choice on Garland's part. And I recently saw a now months old interview with him where he discussed this and how he thinks that characters are too seductive, not just in a sexual way, but in a way that you want to be around them and be their friend. And Lily was intended to be the opposite. Detached, difficult to read. But this isn't some Brechtian thing where everyone keeps you at arm's length all the time. She is distinctly unlike any other character. And while that may be the point, it doesn't really make it any less distracting in the moment. Fortunately, this was all tempered a bit by the release schedule. I watched the show come together over the past 2 months, looking forward each week to see where the gosh damn heck this whole thing was going. And I'm really glad to have seen it that way, because had I waited to binge it, the cumulative effect of all of this and the odd pacing, scenes that end before they've actually finished, etc., would have become much more of a problem than they are in the 50-minute chunks week to week. And having more time to think about it is also just what the show wants. In Devs, the science is less important than the philosophy that comes from it. As I said in my intro, I don't like determinism. And I think that is true for everyone who doesn't have a degree in either philosophy or physics. Because the idea that there is no such thing as agency, that everything is written, fucking sucks. There's no other way to phrase it. I get that circumstances are dictated by forces well beyond our control, and that the vast majority of the time all of us are following a script, and that deviating from that script is hard as hell. But if deviation is actually literally impossible, society would collapse if such a thing could be proven true, particularly in America with its obsession with rugged individualism. I mean, think of the reaction of the devs when they confront themselves 1 second in the future. They must believe in a deterministic world because their work tells them that it exists, but theory is different from praxis. And when they see with perfect clarity the things that they're about to say and the movements they're about to make, and then say those words and make those movements, they break down. Because that's the only rational response to learning that we are all nothing more than pawns in an enormous game of higher dimensional chess. Everett's many worlds interpretation seems to be preferable. Each moment of choice splits off 2 parallel universes where it was and wasn't made. They are all real universes, but they are slightly different. And the further away you go in the branches, the more different they become. Well, I decided to press record on my camera in this universe. There's another one where I didn't, and more where I just gave up on this whole YouTube thing, and infinitely more where I never started a YouTube channel, and even more where I was never even born in the first place. It's kind of exhausting, but it's deterministic in the sense that a computer could follow a single thread forever and be right about that one thread. But it would eventually and increasingly be wrong about all of the other ones, and this is why that static appeared in the projections, because these slight variations from all of the choices eventually broke down the whole thing. And this is why I think that the characters were actually wrong about what they were seeing and why Forrest was wrong to be angry about the Everett interpretation. Because the only way that they could see with perfect clarity is if there weren't variations, and the only way that works is if they're following the correct timeline. That Jesus on the cross must be their Jesus, and that Amaya must be this Forrest's Amaya. And the future must be this timeline's future, until Lily breaks it down. But it's not entirely clear to me what she is breaking. Is it determinism itself, as Katie alleges in the previous episode, or just the quantum computer that Debs runs on? When Forrest sees the present change from the future that he has watched many times, he finally accepts Everett, leading to that truly fascinating many worlds conclusion. But if Everett is correct, what did Lily really do? Because Everett all but requires her to have made that choice to not be the thing that the computer told her she would be in an infinite number of universes, right? So how can she be breaking that? What she's breaking instead can only be the computer. The computer was following a timeline, and it simply tried to follow the wrong branch. And when the branch broke, the entire system collapsed. But did it, though? And this is what I mean when I say trying to really think through it all is just guaranteed to cause confusion. Because the mechanics don't matter. What matters is the fact that Lily was shown a future that others simply went along with, and then she rejected it outright. Forrest and Katie saw for months what was going to happen, what they would say, and when, and how, and to whom, and when it came time, they did it just as was foretold. Forrest says that even though he's heard himself say these things so many times, they still feel like new thoughts. And that gives you a sense of how someone could come to accept this reality. He still feels in the moment like he has some kind of control, even if he knows objectively that he does not. But Lily refuses. She rejects the role that she has been told that she will play, something that she has been trying to do all season, but failing because external factors just bring her back into the fold. She thinks that she can just stop it by staying home, but she can't. And then she does something different than what we saw her do in the projection, and it seems like a triumph until Stewart comes in and writes the course. He turns off the elevator, something that seems like it shouldn't be possible from that console, but there you go, and down it goes, with Forrest and Lily inside. Perhaps Lily does have some amount of choice within her own actions. She can move around her sailboat in unexpected ways, but she can't stop it from hitting a rock and drowning. Despite changing her fate, she dies in the same position we saw all the way back in episode 4. What appeared to be a broken branch was little more than a chip in its bark. 8.4 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you particularly to my patrons, my mom, Hammer and Marco, Kat Saracata, Benjamin Schiff, Anthony Cole, @BlasianFMA, Magnolia Denton, and Elliot Fowler. If you like this video, it's great. If not, I'm sorry. If you want to see more, please subscribe. I hope to see you next week.